The most dangerous trap for established companies growing today isn't technology, it isn't competition, and it isn't changes in market dynamics. It's growing the wrong way. Many established businesses today are using growth strategies from a totally different era. And while growing linearly is still happening in some cases, a lot of their competition in the market is growing exponentially. And inside of that is a gap, and it's costing many of them not thousands, but millions of dollars in opportunity. Hi, my friend, this is Daryl Evans. Welcome back to the Mindshift podcast. And over the last decade, I've been privileged to work with companies who are bridging the gap in growth in the digital landscape and today in AI. And what I'm going to share with you today are 3 critical shifts that'll help you move your established company from a linear growth mindset to an exponential growth mindset. And if this is your first time here, I'd love for you to hit the follow and subscribe button if you like this type of content, and let's dive right in. I've spent the last decade helping companies execute growth strategies, very established companies that were typically 5, 10, 20, 30 years in business. And one specific company we helped go from about a $4 million annual run rate to a $22 million annual run rate, and they eventually exited for $30+ million. And the difference wasn't doing more. You see, they'd already hired marketing agencies, they'd already hired internal talent, they'd already worked with freelancers and consultants, and the difference was about a shift in fundamental behavior and a shift in how they thought about growth entirely. Here's the thing about success. Sometimes your previous success becomes the very barrier to your next level of growth. You see, companies that are established tend to get there because they have built successful routines, successful processes. They've set a specific plan of action, and they've executed on that week in, week out, month in, month out, year in, year out. And if that's you listening to this, congratulations. The one challenge that we can find with success is that we become rooted in our past success and in some ways become blinded by the new opportunities of exponential growth. Thus, we stay along this path of linear decision making. We need one more salesperson here if we're going to reach this many more sales goals, or we need to just spend a little bit more money in this year's budget for marketing and we'll grow another 3 or 4%. But in the meantime, the big risk is that those new competitors in the marketplace are doing exponential things to grow their businesses faster, which is where many of you are struggling. Let me give you a very specific example. So let's go back to that $4 million company. Well, they had built the business the old traditional way, and in that case, it was a it was a business to consumer brand, and they built it through outside partnerships. And at that time, they weren't doing a lot of consumer direct marketing or customer acquisition. So going from a linear standpoint, they were thinking, well, if we can only get this many more partnerships, then that would help us continue to grow. If we can only get this many more referral sources, then that would help us grow. And while that was true, what they missed was that there were new competitors in the marketplace who were building digital growth systems that would not allow for us to continue to beat the street, go out to trade shows, go out to all of these high expensive offline activities, and they built a leveraged digital growth system. Well, when we came along, we sat down, we introduced a digital growth model that we've been using at our agency for quite some time. We instituted that model, and let me be clear for those of you listening, this isn't an overnight thing. You've got to be committed to the transition. So we began the process, we implemented the plan, we built the architecture, and then we started layering in the plan of attack, the strategies, and the tactics. Well, before long, we were able to begin not just taking exponential jumps in his brand presence in the marketplace, but also in customer acquisition. In just 2.5 years, we helped that company go from 4 million to about 12 million. And in the next several years went from 12 to roughly 22. And at that point, there was a competitor in the marketplace who was bigger, who decided, hey, would you like to sell to us? And of course, he entertained the offer and sold. Now, he did a lot of things right. That wasn't all of what we did, but we brought a new level of exponential thinking to the conversation, leveraging digital that he just wasn't thinking about. Still to this day, we're very fortunate that he's a client of ours at the agency. He started another company and came right back to us to put that same model back in place for his new business. And that's the first shift that I wanted you to think about today. Let's figure out, are we still thinking linearly when we should be thinking exponentially? Shift number 2 that I'd like to help you get today, and that is, we're not thinking about random acts of digital marketing or random acts of bringing another salesperson in or random acts of hiring another staff person. We are really thinking about building a system or an architecture with which we are going to add fuel to our growth equation. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Most of the companies that come to our agency that are established businesses will tell us over and over again that they have hired agencies, they've hired consultants, they've hired freelancers, they've hired internal staff, and yet they are still not growing. And in fact, some of these established companies are actually on the decline after 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Now, these companies aren't crashing, let me be clear, but they're established businesses that have been around for 10, 15, 20 years, and somehow all of the new activities, which I call random acts of marketing or random acts of growth theory, are just not working because they're not cohesive. So what we want to think about is, how do we build a new architecture and transition what we used to do? So many established business owners, founders, CEOs, they are stuck on letting go of what got them here. And in fact, what you're missing is the opportunity of letting go of what got you here so that you can embrace the now. And that can be difficult, but when you get the right partner in place, when you get the right strategy in place, when you get the right architecture in place, it's just a fundamental shift in how you do things going forward, and it lets go of the old so you can embrace the new. Let me give you an example in an industry that we worked with a few years ago, where their large business model was B2B, and you can see a theme in this episode. It was business to business. It was a high ticket service, and there was a recurring nature to it, but it was a long recurring, meaning if I bought the product today, I might not need it again for a year or two, depending on how big my company was and how well we used the product or service. Well, one of the things that they didn't realize was that they kept stacking customers after customer after customer. By the way, very successful company. I think they were in business by about that time 17 or 18 years. But what they didn't understand was that they kept going to chase the brand new customer, but they didn't have an architecture or a framework for increasing the lifetime value of their existing customers. They would tell us things like, well, we haven't had customers purchase in so long, but they didn't have a model, and they kept chasing the new customer. For those of you that don't know the study, it's 5 to 25 times harder to get a new customer than to take care of your existing customer and build that lifetime value. So that's a shift between thinking about random activities that are known and custom, known and familiar, known and have been successful, to embracing areas of missed opportunity, which again could be leaving millions of dollars on the line. To close this example, I remember the budget for advertising at this time for Google specifically at around $30,000 per month. Now that may seem high for some of you, that may seem very, very low for some of you. But what was interesting was after we re-engineered their main focus on new customer acquisition, and we lasered in on their buyer persona, lasered in on thinking of building a new system, not just from acquisition, not just from marketing to customer acquisition, but from customer acquisition to lifetime cycle, from lifetime cycle to lifetime client enhancement, which is a part of how we build our framework. He was able to cut his ad spend to nothing on Google. Now, as an agency that runs Google Ads for companies, we weren't necessarily a fan, but he was so impressed by the exponential change in focusing on an area of the business that was right there under his nose, but he didn't know how to capitalize on it. The third idea I have for you, and let me be clear, is that your years of expertise, your track record, your industry knowledge are absolutely invaluable assets to your next level of growth. But you got to be careful, because today's market leaders, today's market competitors are coming in without your long-standing history, which you might think and believe is an advantage to you. But sometimes their ability to come in with a digital-first dominant theme is where you're being outpaced as a long-term established incumbent company, okay? So there are literally 3 ways that I need you to think about this going forward. You might be the best in your industry, but let me be clear, your competitors who are just starting today, they only know this new modern way of growth marketing, especially using the internet, social media, and so forth. So many of you as established companies, there's an opportunity for you to embrace these next 3 ideas. Number 1, the first pillar I want you to embrace is the idea that you must be omnipresent. You've got to be visible wherever your customers are hanging out online. Let me be clear, that doesn't mean just be present at every trade show that they're going to anymore, at every association event that they're hanging out at. You literally have to be present online, on social, on YouTube, in email, at the trade shows if that's still a viable channel for you. And that bothers many CEOs and founders today to think that you've got to play in such a broad spectrum. But omnipresence is number 1. Number 2, you've got to put content first. You've got to put your thought leadership out there first. You've got to put your subject matter expertise out there first. And for many of you who've been around for 10, 15, 20 years, you're thinking, no. If they just get to me, if you just market to them and get them to our office, if you just get them to our sales team has great closing numbers. And I hear you. But listen, today's consumer, old and young, baby boomer to millennial to Z, they all prefer a digital first experience. That is not me making these numbers up. That's not only the data behind our agency, but this is data coming from Boston Consulting Group, from Wharton Business School, from Harvard. These are not numbers just made up. The consumer today has control. The consumer today wants autonomy. The consumer today wants to take their own journey, even on some of your very specific B2B, high ticket, very complex solutions that you provide to the market. Now, this is not a Fortune 500 conversation or Fortune 1000 conversation, but if you're upper, small to mid-market strong, you have to begin to understand that your exponential growth will come from having a content-forward mentality. Last but not least, you want to make sure that systems drive all of your functions of growth today. You've got to let go of this randomness. You've got to let go of, oh, we hired someone to do our Facebook ads. You've got to let go of this idea of, well, yeah, we did have someone taking care of our Google ads. Oh, well, we did hire this writer to write our blog. You don't realize that each of those components are good ingredients to a good strategy. The problem is if they're happening out in a silo, you're still operating in a linear fashion where everything is not congruent and holistic and won't deliver the exponential results. When we come into a company, and I can think of one that's on my mind right now, I can think in most cases where I'll see that there's an agency over here doing this, and there's a writer over there doing that, and there's someone over there doing social over here, and there's a graphic designer over there, but everyone's not really on the same page. I don't know if you can resonate with this, but you know, the key isn't just bringing them all into the room for them to get their ideas together. It's starting at the top and building a brand new system and methodology and a quote unquote, what I like to say, a way we do it here philosophy. And that is a complete 180 turnaround from the way many companies are doing things today. But it is critical that if you're going to make the leap from this linear thought process, this linear growth model, where it's just incrementally moving along, then and into an exponential growth mindset. By the way, exponential doesn't mean exponentially more money. Exponential doesn't mean, I mean, if you look at what's happening with AI right now, that is an exponential shift in what you can do in terms of output, production, strategy, and so forth. That is a low cost transition and transformation that any company can make. And I get it. It's not always easy. It's new. There's 1,000 tools coming out a day, it seems, but that's one of those exponential shifts that don't necessarily require exponential investment, but it is a shift that is needing to be done today. So let's make this practical and bring this episode home. I want to ask you a couple of questions, 3 of them. Number 1, are your current growth methods truly scalable, or are they limited by the current level of human capital that you have at your disposal? When was the last time you fundamentally questioned your approach to your marketing? And is your company strategically placed to take advantage of the digital landscape and the leverage that's available? Or are you still just showing up every day with your team doing digital activities or digital things? Here's one immediate action that I have for you to take away. I want you to think about the top 3 strategies you're using or top 3 tactics you're using in your growth today. And for each one, I want you to think about, is your company building a system that will compound over time? Or is this a routine task that feels like a treadmill that we're just running in place every single week to produce the outcome or the output? When you can think about leveraged activities over individual activities, when you can stop thinking linearly and start thinking exponentially, and when you can look at completely shifting the market dynamic from what got us here to what's available to us now, you won't just experience growth in a just a revenue standpoint. You're going to receive cost benefits because today's technology is cheaper than it's ever been. AI is freeing up capital like it's never has. You're going to experience exponential growth, which I know, by the way, I talk to you all the time. You established business owners, founders, CEOs, that's exactly who calls me and tells me that we are just tired of creeping along. And in fact, if I were to do it with they're tired of the revenue just actually going down like this. This can be resolved. And it's not just resolved from here to just flatlining to just incrementally going up. We can change things holistically, but it's going to take a shift in your mind and a shift in how you think about what got us here and what's going to get us there. So there were 3 things that we were talking about today, and that is, number 1, this shift from linear to exponential. Number 2, this idea from going from just random acts of things to do, whether that's marketing activities or sales activities, to growth architectures, growth frameworks that are going to be installed in this new modern economy. And the last part is, how do you take your old dominance and turn it into this modern digital playbook, whether that's content, whether that's your brand and thought leadership, and whether that's completely redesigning how your playbook works internally. Listen, if you've gotten any value out of today's episode, if I prompted you to think a little bit about where you sit right now with your growth model, then I would appreciate it if you hit the like or the follow or subscribe button wherever you're listening to this episode. If you need help thinking through this, working through this, well, I'd like to invite you to join us inside of the Mindshift Inner Circle. The Mindshift Inner Circle is for entrepreneurs, founders, and CEOs just like you who are really working to make the shift from this linear grind out mentality. I remember how we used to do it, but really I don't know how to get to this new place. It's a thought tank, it's an educational environment, it's a community that is designed to help you make these transitions faster, built on the back of the playbooks we've been using for the last 14 years at our agency, Yoko Local. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. This is part 1 of a 6-part series, so I look forward to seeing you back next week on the Mindshift Podcast.